My name disappeared from their conversations before I even noticed it was gone. It started with the group chat going quiet, not the kind of quiet that happens when everyone's busy, but the deliberate silence that settles when someone has created a new chat without you. I found out about my cousin's engagement party through a Facebook photo. There I was, scrolling through pictures of my entire family laughing around a restaurant table I was never invited to sit at. The caption read, "Family Celebration," and I counted every face except mine. I stared at that photo for longer than I care to admit, zooming in on their expressions, searching for any sign that someone had wondered where I was. There was none. They looked complete without me, like a puzzle that had never been missing a piece. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Because right now, sitting here in the quiet of my apartment, I'm wondering if anyone else has felt this invisible in their own family. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, like water seeping through a foundation crack you didn't know existed. First, it was the missed invitation. Then I noticed my mother had stopped calling me about Dad's doctor appointments. My sister began making decisions about our grandmother's care without consulting me, and when they renovated the family lake house, the one where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, I learned about it when my nephew posted a video of the construction crew on TikTok. I lived 2 blocks away from my parents' house. 2 blocks. I could walk there in 4 minutes if I hurried. But somehow, the distance between us had stretched into something unmeasurable, something that couldn't be crossed by footsteps alone. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd driven over after work, letting myself in through the back door like I'd done 1,000 times before. They were all there. Mom, Dad, my sister Karen, and her husband Mike, sitting around the kitchen table with papers spread between them like they were conducting official business. "Oh," my mother said when she saw me, and the word hung in the air like smoke. "We weren't expecting you." "I can see that." I pulled out a chair, the same chair I'd sat in for family dinners growing up, and settled myself at the table. "What's all this?" They exchanged glances, quick, furtive looks that spoke a language I wasn't fluent in anymore. Karen cleared her throat. "We're just discussing some updates to the estate planning. Nothing major. Nothing major." The phrase echoed in my chest like a stone dropped into an empty well. I picked up one of the papers. It was a revision to my father's will, dated 3 months ago. My name appeared exactly once, in a clause that designated me as a backup beneficiary, the person who would inherit only if everyone else died first. "When did we discuss this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "We didn't really discuss it," my father said, not meeting my eyes. We figured you'd want to keep things simple. You've got your own life, your career. We didn't want to burden you with family business." Burden. The word sliced through me with surgical precision. I had been their burden, and they had found a way to lighten their load. "I see." I set the paper down carefully, aligning its edges with the table's grain. "And the lake house renovation? Was that also too much of a burden to mention?" "Sarah." My mother's voice took on that patient tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "You've always been the independent one. We just assumed." "You assumed wrong." The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through her sentence like glass through silk. "You assumed I wouldn't care. You assumed I wouldn't want to be involved. You assumed I had better things to do than be part of this family." The silence that followed was deafening. It pressed against my eardrums, filled my throat, made it hard to breathe. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood, my history, my last name, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. Karen reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. "It's not like that, Sarah. Just what?" I pulled my hands into my lap, away from her almost touch. "You just decided I didn't matter anymore? You just concluded that 28 years of being part of this family was enough?" "Don't be dramatic," she said. And those 3 words completed something inside me, a circuit that had been waiting for the final connection. Don't be dramatic, the phrase my mother had used when I cried about not making the softball team in high school. The same words my father had said when I was upset about them missing my college graduation. The refrain that had followed me through every disappointment, every hurt feeling, every moment when I dared to suggest that their actions had wounded me. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate control. "I'm going to go now." "Sarah." "Wait." My mother started. "No." I held up my hand, and something in my voice must have convinced her I meant it, because she stopped mid-sentence. "I'm going to go, and I'm going to think about this. And you're going to think about it too. You're going to think about what it means to systematically exclude someone from a family they thought they belonged to." I walked to the back door, my hand on the knob, when my father's voice stopped me. "We never meant to hurt you." I turned back, taking in the scene one more time. The papers scattered across the table, the guilty expressions, the careful distance they'd all put between themselves and me. "The thing about not meaning to hurt someone," I said quietly, "is that it doesn't make the hurt disappear." The drive home took longer than usual because I had to pull over twice to cry. Not the dramatic sobbing they would have dismissed, but the quiet, steady tears that come when you finally understand something you'd been refusing to see. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch and let the reality settle around me like dust after an earthquake. They had been slowly, systematically erasing me from their lives, and I had been so busy trying to maintain my place at their table that I hadn't noticed the chair being pulled out from under me. That night, I made a list. Not a dramatic manifesto, or a letter I'd never send, but a practical inventory of every way I'd been contributing to this family without recognition. I managed the logistics for Dad's contracting business, the scheduling, the client communications, the vendor relationships. I'd been doing it for 3 years, ever since he'd mentioned being overwhelmed. It wasn't official. There was no job title, no salary. Just me, quietly keeping his professional life organized because he'd asked for help, and I'd said yes. I coordinated Mom's book club meetings, maintained the family calendar, remembered everyone's birthdays and anniversaries. I was the one who researched care facilities when Grandma started showing signs of dementia. I was the one who drove her to appointments when everyone else was too busy. Looking at that list, written in my own handwriting on a yellow legal pad, I realized something that made my chest tight with a mixture of anger and clarity. They needed me more than they wanted me. The next morning, I started making changes. I didn't announce them. I didn't send angry emails or make proclamations. I simply began the quiet work of removing myself from the systems they took for granted. I stopped answering work calls for Dad's business. I canceled the standing appointment reminders I'd been sending for Mom's medical checkups. I removed myself from the family calendar app. It felt like performing surgery on my own life, carefully cutting away connections that had become infected with resentment and neglect. Each small withdrawal was both painful and liberating, like removing a splinter that had been embedded so long you'd forgotten it was there. The silence from their end was immediate and telling. No one called to ask why I wasn't responding to business emails. No one noticed that Mom had missed her mammogram appointment. The family group chat continued without me, and I didn't try to rejoin it. Instead, I focused on building something that belonged entirely to me. I'd been working as a project manager for a marketing firm for 6 years, competent but not passionate about the work. But I'd always been good at organizing, at seeing the connections between moving parts, at solving problems before they became crises. So I started freelance consulting, helping small business owners streamline their operations. My first client was a woman who ran a boutique bakery and was drowning in the administrative side of her business. Within a month, I'd set up systems that cut her paperwork time in half and increased her profit margin by 20%. She referred me to her sister, who owned a small accounting firm. Word spread quietly through networks I didn't even know existed. By December, I had enough clients to quit my day job. By February, I had a waiting list. The work filled a space in my life I hadn't realized was empty. These people, small business owners, entrepreneurs, families trying to organize their finances, they valued what I brought to their lives. They paid me for my expertise. They recommended me to their friends. They saw my contributions as essential, not optional. For the first time in my adult life, I understood what it felt like to be professionally valued rather than personally tolerated. Spring arrived with an invitation that landed in my mailbox like a paper airplane thrown from my past. My cousin David was getting married, and somehow my name had made it onto the guest list. I stared at the heavy cardstock, the elegant calligraphy, the formal request for the pleasure of my company. It had been 6 months since I'd spoken to anyone in my immediate family. I almost didn't go. The thought of seeing them all, of navigating the careful politeness that would inevitably surround our first interaction since my withdrawal, made my stomach clench with anxiety. But David had always been kind to me, and this was his day. My family's dysfunction didn't have to become his problem. The wedding was beautiful in the way that family weddings always are, full of shared history and inside jokes and relatives you only see at weddings and funerals. I arrived early and found a seat toward the back, close enough to participate but far enough away to maintain the distance I'd worked so hard to establish. They saw me, of course. My parents, sitting in the second row, Karen and Mike, with their kids squirming in the pew beside them. The moment of recognition was brief. A slight widening of my mother's eyes, a quick nod from my father. Karen raised her hand in a small wave that I returned with equal restraint. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, they approached me as a unit, the same formation they'd taken that night in the kitchen, presenting a united front against the disruption I represented. Sarah. My mother's voice was carefully neutral. You look well. Thank you. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, grateful to have something to do with my hands. The ceremony was lovely. We've been wondering how you're doing, my father said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. They'd had my phone number, my address, my email for 6 months. If they'd been wondering, they'd had plenty of opportunities to find out. I'm doing very well, actually. I took a sip of champagne, buying myself time to choose my words carefully. Business is thriving. I'm booked solid through the fall. Business? Karen's eyebrows rose slightly. I started my own consulting firm. Operations management for small businesses. I kept my voice level, professional. It turns out there's quite a demand for someone who can organize systems and solve problems. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. For years, I'd been doing exactly that for them. Organizing systems, solving problems, managing logistics, without recognition or compensation. Now, I was doing the same work for strangers who paid me well and treated me with respect. That's wonderful, my mother said, and I could hear her trying to inject genuine enthusiasm into her voice. We had no idea you were starting your own business. There's quite a lot you don't know about my life, I replied, and the words hung between us like a bridge none of us were ready to cross. The conversation might have continued in that careful, polite vein, but we were interrupted by David's father, my Uncle Tom, who clapped my father on the shoulder and addressed me directly. Sarah, I was just telling your dad that David's been raving about the work you did for his business. Said you saved him thousands of dollars and probably prevented a complete operational breakdown. I felt the shift in the air, the subtle change in how my family was looking at me. David owned a small construction company, and I'd helped him reorganize his project management systems and vendor relationships. It had been a challenging project, but ultimately very successful. David's a smart businessman, I said. He just needed someone to help him see the bigger picture. Well, whatever you did, it worked. He's been trying to get his friends to hire you, but apparently you're all booked up. For now, Yes. Uncle Tom turned to my father. You must be proud. Sarah's got quite a reputation building in the business community. My father's smile looked strained. Yes, we're very proud. But I could see the question in his eyes, the confusion about how I'd built something significant without their knowledge or involvement. For 6 months, while they'd been conducting family business without me, I'd been building a professional reputation that had nothing to do with them. The conversation wound down naturally, and they drifted away to mingle with other relatives. I stayed for the reception, danced with my uncle, caught up with cousins I rarely saw, and watched my immediate family from across the room. They kept glancing in my direction, and I realized they were seeing me differently, not as the family member they could take for granted, but as someone who had built something valuable without their help or permission. I left the wedding feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. Not the bitter satisfaction of being proven right, but the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've chosen the correct path, even when it's difficult. Summer passed in a blur of client meetings and project deadlines. My business had grown, beyond my wildest expectations, and I found myself turning down work more often than accepting it. I hired an assistant, then a second one. I moved from my small apartment to a house with an office space, complete with a conference room where I could meet with clients. The physical distance from my childhood neighborhood felt symbolic. I was no longer the person who lived 2 blocks from her parents, available for any emergency or favor or last-minute family obligation. I was someone with boundaries, with professional commitments, with a life that didn't revolve around being useful to people who didn't value my contributions. Thought about them sometimes, especially late at night when the work was done and the house was quiet. I wondered if they missed me, or if they'd simply redistributed my responsibilities among themselves without much thought. I wondered if Dad's business was running smoothly without my behind-the-scenes management, if Mom was keeping track of her appointments, if Karen was handling Grandma's care coordination. But I didn't reach out to find answers to those questions. Some doors, once closed, need to stay that way until someone on the other side cares enough to knock. The knock came in September, delivered not to my door, but to my email inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent, family business matter." The sender was my father's lawyer, a man I'd met exactly once, at the reading of my grandfather's will 15 years ago. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened the message. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing regarding a time-sensitive matter concerning Mitchell & Sons Contracting. As you may be aware, your father is pursuing a partnership opportunity with Hartwell Development Group that would significantly expand the business operations. However, during our document review, we discovered that you are listed as a co-signatory on several key business accounts and legal documents from your involvement in the company's operational management over the past 3 years. Your signature is required to move forward with the partnership agreement. Could you please contact my office at your earliest convenience to schedule a meeting? The investors are hoping to finalize this agreement by month's end. Sincerely, Robert. Chen-esque. I read the email 3 times before the full implications settled in. During those years of quietly managing Dad's business logistics, I had apparently been added to official documents, bank accounts, vendor agreements, insurance policies. They had needed someone reliable to handle the administrative details, and I had been available, competent, and willing to help. Now that reliability had created a legal reality, they couldn't simply ignore or work around. I didn't respond immediately. For 3 days, I let the email sit in my inbox while I went about my normal routine. I met with clients, reviewed project proposals, attended a networking lunch where 2 different people asked if I was accepting new clients. My life continued full and purposeful, while somewhere across town, my family was discovering that they couldn't move forward without me. On the 4th day, I called the lawyer. "Ms. Mitchell." Robert Chen's voice was professionally warm, but carried an undertone of urgency. "Thank you for getting back to me. I hope we can resolve this matter quickly." "I'd be happy to help," I said, settling into my desk chair and opening my calendar. "But I'll need to understand the full scope of what I'm being asked to sign." Of course. The documents are quite extensive, so I'd prefer to review them in person. Are you available to meet this week? I flipped through my calendar, noting the packed schedule of client meetings and project deadlines. I could meet Friday afternoon, but I should mention that I'll need to bring my own legal counsel to review the documents. There was a pause. That's certainly you're right, of course. Though I should mention that your family is hoping to keep this process straightforward. I'm sure they are, I replied evenly. Friday at 2:00? Yes, that works. And Ms. Mitchell, your family will be attending this meeting as well. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out the window at the tree-lined street that had become my new normal. A year ago, if my family had needed something from me, I would have dropped everything to help. I would have signed whatever they asked me to sign, trusted their judgment, prioritized their emergency over my own schedule. But a year ago, I was still living in the fiction that being useful made me valuable to them. Now I understood the difference. Hired Margaret Reyes, a lawyer who specialized in small business contracts, to review the documents with me. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, who didn't waste time on pleasantries. These documents are more complex than your family probably realizes, she told me after reviewing the files Robert Chen had sent over. You're not just a co-signatory. In several instances, you're listed as a managing partner. If you wanted to, you could probably argue for significant ownership stakes in the business. I don't want ownership, I said. I just want to understand what I'm agreeing to. Good. Because they're asking you to sign away those rights in exchange for a one-time payment that's probably about 1/10 of what those stakes are actually worth. Margaret's analysis was thorough and damning. The partnership agreement would give Hartwell Development Group significant control over Mitchell & Sons, including the right to restructure operations and potentially eliminate positions. My father would remain as a figurehead, but the real power would shift to the investors. The irony, Margaret noted, is that your operational management over the past 3 years is probably a big part of why this company is attractive to investors in the first place. You streamlined their processes, improved their profit margins, and expanded their client base. Now, they want to cash out on that success. Friday afternoon arrived with an early autumn chill that made me grateful for the wool blazer I'd chosen. I met Margaret at the lawyer's office, a sleek downtown building that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Robert Chen's conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. My family was already there when Margaret and I arrived. Mom, Dad, and Karen, sitting on one side of a long mahogany table like they were facing a tribunal. They all looked older than I remembered. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and Mom had new lines around her eyes. Karen looked tired in the way that comes from juggling young children and adult responsibilities. Sarah, my mother said when I walked in, and her voice carried a warmth that had been absent at the wedding. You look wonderful. Thank you. I took the seat across from them, Margaret beside me. I understand you need my signature on some documents. It's really just a formality, my father said quickly. The lawyers found some old paperwork where your name got added during that time when you were helping with the business. We just need to clean that up so we can move forward with this partnership. Margaret placed her briefcase on the table with a soft thud. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, it's considerably more than a formality. Your daughter has significant legal interests in this business that date back 3 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Karen leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means, Margaret said, opening her briefcase and removing a thick folder, that Sarah has been functioning as a managing partner in this business for years, whether anyone realized it or not. Her signature isn't just required for this partnership, it's required because she has legal standing to object to it. I watched my father's face cycle through several emotions, confusion, realization, and something that might have been fear. But she was just helping out. It wasn't official. The documents say otherwise, Margaret replied calmly. bank signature, cards, vendor agreements, insurance policies. Sarah's name is on all of them as a business partner, not an employee or volunteer. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I'd experienced with my family before. This wasn't the awkward, quiet of hurt feelings or misunderstandings. This was the silence of people realizing that the ground they thought was solid had shifted beneath their feet. Robert Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should review the partnership proposal and discuss how to move forward. For the next hour, we went through the documents page by page. Margaret asked pointed questions about valuation, profit distribution, and management structure. I listened more than I spoke, taking notes in the margins of my copy. The picture that emerged was both impressive and infuriating. Mitchell & Sons was worth significantly more than I'd realized, largely due to operational improvements I'd implemented without fanfare or recognition. The partnership with Hartwell would inject capital for expansion, but would also fundamentally change the nature of the business. "This is a good opportunity," I said when the presentation was finished. "The terms are fair, and Hartwell has a strong reputation in the development space." My father's shoulders relaxed slightly. "So you'll sign?" "I'll sign," I said, and watched relief wash over all three of their faces. "But first, I'd like to have a conversation. Not about the business. About us." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Sarah, we don't really have time for—" "We have time," I said quietly, and something in my voice made her stop mid-sentence. "This partnership expires if we don't sign by Monday. It's Friday afternoon. We have time." I looked around the table, at these people who shared my DNA, my childhood memories, my last name. For the past year, I've been trying to understand how I became dispensable to this family. How someone could contribute to your lives for years, managing Dad's business, coordinating Mom's medical care, organizing family events, and still be excluded from the decisions that mattered. My mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We never meant to exclude you. But you did exclude me. Systematically, deliberately. I kept my voice steady, professional. And the strangest part is that you kept needing me to do things, important things, while simultaneously treating me like I didn't matter. That's not true," Karen protested. "Isn't it?" I opened my notebook to the list I'd made that night after, leaving their kitchen. 3 years of managing business operations, 5 years of coordinating Grandma's care, 2 years of organizing Mom's medical appointments, 7 years of maintaining the family calendar, remembering birthdays, planning, gatherings. And in all that time, how many major family decisions included my input? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. My father finally spoke, his voice rougher than usual. "We thought you were too busy with your own life to want to be bothered with family drama. You thought wrong." I closed the notebook. "But more importantly, you never asked what I wanted. You made assumptions about my priorities, my availability, my feelings. You decided I was too independent to need inclusion, too busy to want involvement, too different to deserve consideration. We were wrong," my mother said simply, and those 3 words carried more weight than any elaborate apology could have. Yes, you were wrong. And I spent months being angry about that, feeling hurt and rejected and invisible. I looked at each of them in turn. But eventually, I realized that your inability to see my value said more about you than it did about me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a pen, not a dramatic gesture, just a practical one. "I'm going to sign these documents because it's the right thing to do for the business. But I'm not signing them to earn my way back into this family's good graces. I'm signing them because I choose to." The distinction was important, and I could see in their faces that they understood it. I signed each page carefully, Margaret checking, my work as we went. When it was finished, I capped my pen and sat back in my chair. "There's something else," I said. "The payment you're offering me for signing away my partnership rights. I don't want it." My father blinked. "You don't want the money?" "I want you to donate it to the Alzheimer's Association, in Grandma's name." My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and this time the tears did fall. Grandma had died the previous spring, something I'd learned through a cousin's Facebook post, since no one had thought to call me with the news until after the funeral arrangements were made. "Sarah," Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "I loved her too," I said simply, "even if you forgot that." We sat in that conference room for another 20 minutes, not talking about business or legal documents, but about memory and regret, and the complicated mathematics of family love. It wasn't a reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that to happen in a single afternoon. But it was a recognition, an acknowledgement of harm done and value overlooked. When we finally stood to leave, my mother approached me hesitantly. Would you be willing to have dinner sometime, just to talk?" I considered the question carefully. "Maybe, but not because you need something from me. And not because you feel guilty about how you've treated me. Only if you genuinely want to know who I am now, not who you remember me being." She nodded. "I would like that very much." Walking out of that building, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd forgiven them. Forgiveness, I was learning, was a process, not a moment. But because I'd finally stopped needing their approval to validate my worth. Margaret and I had coffee afterward, discussing the business implications of the partnership and the legal protections I'd need going forward. But my mind kept drifting to the look on my father's face when he realized how much I'd contributed to his business success, or the way my mother's voice had cracked when she said they were wrong. They had spent a year conducting family business, without me, confident in their ability to move forward independently. But when it mattered most, when the future of everything they'd built hung in the balance, they couldn't take a single step without my signature. I drove home through the streets of a city that had become mine, past the house where I'd grown up, and toward the house I'd chosen for myself. The late afternoon sun slanted through my windshield, illuminating dust motes that danced like possibilities in the golden light. 6 months later, my mother and I have dinner once a month. The conversations are careful but genuine, focused on building something new rather than excavating the ruins of what we used to have. My father occasionally asks for business advice, but he pays me for it now. Professional rates for professional work. Karen and I exchange holiday cards. It's not the family I once wanted, but it's the family we can actually be, honest about our limitations, clear about our boundaries, and finally free from the fiction that blood relationships exempt us from treating each other with respect. Last week, I got a wedding invitation from my youngest cousin. My name was handwritten on the envelope in careful calligraphy, and inside, someone had added a personal note. "We hope you can make it. It wouldn't be the same without you." I smiled when I read it, because I knew it was true. Not because I needed to coordinate logistics or manage details, but because I was wanted for who I am, not what I can do. Some victories aren't won with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Some victories are won with the quiet dignity of knowing your worth, even when others have forgotten it. Some victories are as simple as a signature placed on a line, not in surrender, but in the full knowledge of your power to choose.